Hi, this is PG of PG's Lumacy. In this tutorial, we will be making Dear Daniel from the Sanrio character series made on the single Rainbow Loom. The bands that we need for this project will be white for the body, dark blue or navy blue for the overalls, ocean blue for the shirt. We will be using black for the whiskers and the hair, and we will be using a single yellow band for the nose. We will be completing this project on a single Rainbow Loom, and of course we will be using the hook from the Rainbow Loom kit. You may use the plastic hook, but it may not be strong enough for the heavy layers of bands, but it will do. We will be needing white seed beads for the buttons on the overalls, black seed beads for the eyes, and we will be using a piece of floss to string the seed beads with rubber bands. It's good to have a fine crochet hook and a pair of tweezers when we work the fine details of the project. Let's prepare the seed beads that we need for this project. We will be using a piece of floss to string our seed beads with rubber bands. And for the eyes, we will be using 2 seed beads, and we insert our floss into the seed beads. And then we also get our rubber band, a white single band, on to the floss. Then we reinsert the end of the seed bead into the beads, and that forms a loop that will pull the band into the beads. And this will be the piece that we will be using for the eyes. Using the same principle, we will be stringing our white seed beads with navy blue rubber bands. And so we will be using a single white bead and then get our navy blue band. And this will be the piece for the buttons on the overalls. We need one more. And those are the pieces that we need with seed beads. Unless otherwise specified, we will be using double bands or 2 bands for each placement on this project. Sometimes I mistakenly refer to them as a band when there are 2 of them. That is when I am treating them as a unit. So whether I say band or bands, I will be referring to double bands, unless I specifically say single or triple or however many bands I am using for a placement. Please take note of that. We will start our layout on this row of pins. It is the second from the top. And by the way, please take note that our loom is in the rectangle configuration and the pins are aligned. Make sure that the arrow is pointing downwards or pointing towards you. Okay, let's start our layout by placing vertical bands on this center pins. Then let's place horizontal bands on this right pins, and let us do that on the other side as well. Now let us add diagonal bands on these 2 pins, and let's do that for this side as well. Let's add a row of double white bands on this row. It is a good habit to push down on the bands that we have on the loom to make room for the other bands that we will be adding. Let us add another row of double white bands. We are adapting this design from an extended loom, so we need to work in layers. So let us add a chain of double bands to these pins on this side. We will be adding 3 double bands to this side. That formed a top layer on this side. Let us do that for the other side as well. Let us now add the bands for the ears, and we will be working one ear at a time, starting with this side. Let's place double bands on these pins and then add another pair of bands to the top pins, and then we will place a diagonal band on these 2 pins, and that's a pair of bands actually. Then we will add a capping band to this top pin, and we will loop that 4 times. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we have to loop the bands for the ears, and note that we are looping in the opposite direction. Normally we loop from the bottom going to the top, but for the pieces for the ears, we will be looping from the top to the bottom. Okay, go into the capping band and then grab the diagonal bands. Get that out of the pin and then loop to this center pin. Okay, then let's go for this vertical band. Again, we get it out of the pin and then loop to the pin below it. Okay. Okay, and then we are grabbing only this pair of bands. Okay, we have to push down on the band so they don't slip off. Okay, and then loop to this pin. Now we have to get these bands out of this pin. Okay, like so. And then move these loops to this pin. From the center pin, we move them to this pin over here. Okay, now let's work on the other ear. Again, let us add a pair of vertical bands on these pins, and then on these pins as well. Then let us add diagonal bands on these pins. We will add a capping band looped 4 times to the top left pin. Now let us loop the bands, starting with this diagonal band. Let's get it out of the pin and loop to this center pin. Okay, and go for these vertical bands and then loop to this pin. Now let us grab these bands. Get them out of the pin. And then loop to this pin. Okay, get these bands out of this pin and then move these bands or loops to this pin. Let us add horizontal bands on these pins, starting with this side over here and then on these two pins. Let's now work on the body, which is actually the shirt and the overalls for Dear Daniel. Let us start with these two pins in the center, and we will be placing ocean blue bands on those pins. Then let us grab navy blue bands and place diagonal bands on these pins and on the other side as well. We will be adding a row of double bands to this row, but for these side pins, we will be using the bands with the seed beads on them. Okay, let's place one on these two pins, and then let's grab a single band without a bead and place it on top of that band that we placed. So this will still be a double band placement, but one of them has a bead. Let's do that for the other side. Place the band with the bead and then another single band without a bead. For this pair of pins in the center, we will add two dark blue bands. Now let us add a row of double bands on this row. Then let us add another row of double bands. Then for this next row, we will only be placing double bands on these side pins. For this middle section, we will be adding diagonal bands. Again, let us push down on the pins or the bands that we have to make room for the next layer that we will be adding to the layout. We will be placing a chain of 3 double bands to these pins. That forms a top layer. Let's do that on this other side. We will now add the legs. Let us place 2 white bands on these side pins and then 4 white bands all together on the next pins. Then we will add a capping band on this pin looped 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. Let's do that for the other leg. 2 white bands, 4 white bands and a capping band looped 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. We will be using these empty pins in the bottom of the loom to make the arm pieces. Let's start with 3 ocean blue bands and then 2 white bands and 3 white bands. We will add a capping band to this pin looped 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. Then we will loop these bands starting from the bottom. And then we will get this piece for the arm of the loom and we will place it on this pin. I call this the shoulder pin. Okay, so we will place the arm piece on this pin. Okay, pause the video or rewind it to make the other arm, which we will attach to this pin. This is the other arm piece that we made, and we will attach it to this shoulder pin. Another piece that we will be making on these bottom pins will be these hair pieces on top of Dear Daniel's head. So to make those, we will need 3 black bands and 2 white bands. For the black bands, we stretch them out a bit. And then one by one, we loop them 3 times on this bottom pin. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, then push them down. Let's have the other one. 1, 2, 3. Then let's have the last one. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so those are the 3 black bands that we looped on this pin. Now we grab our 2 white bands and using our hook we string the 3 black bands with the 2 white bands. Okay. I get that in there and then I secure. Then I get this entire piece of the pin, and this is the piece that we need for the hair. Okay, let me show it to you. Okay, this is the piece that we will need for the hair, and we will be placing this piece on this top portion over here. But there are some things that we need to do first. Okay, I would like to get these loops out of the way, and I move them to this center top pin for now. Okay, I took 2 of the loops from these bands out of the way. Going on the other side. Okay, let's get these loops. and get them out of the way for now. Okay. And we will be placing the ends of the white bands holding the hair pieces on these 2 pins. Okay, so using your hook, grab one end of the white double bands and place them on this pin. And then place the other end on this pin. And make sure that your hair pieces are on the top side of this pin. Now, let's put back the bands that we got out of the way, starting with this one. Okay, let's put it back. And then let's also put this one back, like so. Okay. Now for easier looping later, I would like to get these loops from one of the black bands. I want to get them to this pin. Okay, and then grab the loops from this other band and place them on this pin. I grab one of the loops from this middle band and place it on this pin. And I grab the other 2 loops. Okay, a fine crochet hook will be better for this. And I get the 2 loops and place them on these or this pin. Okay, that will help us get this arrangement of bands when we secure this top portion. Let's add horizontal bands that will hold the vertical bands together and will also give us the shape that we need for Dear Daniel. For this row of bands, we place a single band. Now for this row of pins, we will not be placing a horizontal band per se, but we will be using the piece for the eyes that we made earlier. Okay, we place it on these 2 pins on the sides, and we make sure that the eyes are on the sides of this pin, and the band holding the beads will be on the bottom side of this pin and not on the top. Okay, make sure it is in this section over here. For the body, we will be placing a single band on this row of pins. And for the row above it, we will be placing a single band first on these 2 pins, and then loop the band to the middle pin, and then pull it all the way to the 3rd pin. And that is what I call a 1 1/3 looped band. So this is how the layout will look like with all the bands in place. This will be a good time to pause the video and compare your work with the one on the screen. Let us loop the bands starting from the bottom. And there are 4 bands on this leg piece. And so if you find it hard to loop all 4 at the same time, you could loop 2 at a time. And you will get the same results. Okay, and then loop these double bands. Let's do that for the other leg. Now when we get to this section, we will work on this top layer on the side first. We will loop from this pin all the way to this pin. Let's do that on this other side as well. Now let us get these bands on the top layer out of the pins. Make sure you will not be twisting or flipping the bands when you get them out of the pin. Okay, then pull them outwards a bit so you can see the bands in the bottom. Let us work on these diagonal bands. Okay. And then get this one. Okay. And it's easy to miss these bands because now they're somewhat hidden. So make sure that you loop them too. Okay, so let's get them. Okay. Next, let us work on this row of bands. Then this row. When you get to this section, let us loop these bands. Okay, and we're looping over the arm piece. And then get the bead to the front part. Because right now it's in the back section. We need to get this bead to the front section. And to do that, we go into these loops. And then I hold them down on this side so they don't slip off. And then get the bead to the front. Like so. Being careful not to break any bands in the process. Okay, I got my bead to the front side. Let's do that on this other side. First, loop the bands. Let me go over the arm piece and then get the bead to the front. And then loop this middle pair of bands. When you get to this section, for a neater design, work on the diagonal bands first. And then here's another band that's easily forgotten, easily missed. Make sure you loop it too. This is the middle band. And make sure you loop it too. When we get to this section, we will be looping these horizontal bands first. And we will be looping the one that's on top. And in my case, it's this pair of bands. So we go in and then loop it to this side pin. Okay, this is a heavy layer of bands here, so it would help to use the bottom end of a crochet hook and gently release the band or the bands from being pressed to this pin. Okay, now let's get these bands. And then these middle bands. Now we will work on the top layer of bands on this side. And to get the shape for Dear Daniel, we need to add double bands to the layout. So the way to do that would be to first get this horizontal band. This is a single band. We get one end of this pin and just let it sit on this center pin for now. And then we loop this pair of bands. Okay, then we grab all the loops from this pair of bands and get them off the pin and keep them on the hook, like so. And then we get our 2 additional bands and then place them on this pin. Okay. Now, you could either use your hands, your fingers, or use an extra hook. Grab the end of the horizontal band that we took from this pin and put it back, like so. Okay. Now, we grab the end of these additional bands and get them into the loops on our hook, like so. And then the loops that we form, we place on this pin. So by doing that, we were able to add double bands to this layout on the side. Then we go for this pair of bands. We will loop it. And then we go for this pair of bands. Okay. Before I pull them out, I make sure that I'm grabbing the right bands. And then I pull them out and loop to this pin over here. Okay. Let us do that on the other side. Okay. Get this band out of the pin and let it sit on the center pin, and then loop this pair of bands. Get the loops from that pair of bands out of the pin and keep it on the hook. And then grab your 2 additional bands and place them on this pin. Now with an extra hook or your fingers, grab this end of the horizontal band and put it back on the pin. Okay. And then grab the ends of these double bands and get them into the loops on our hook. Okay. And then loop them to this pin over here. Okay. Then we loop these bands. We now go for these bands. You go into this pin. Okay. And I make sure that I grab the right bands, get them out of the pin, and then loop to this pin. So now we have looped the bands on the top layers on both sides. We will now get these bands out of the pins, being careful not to flip them or twist them while doing so. Okay. Now this band that's holding the bead should be placed in the bottom of this pin. Okay, not around it, but we have to make sure that it is in this bottom. So we have to get it over this pin to the bottom section. Okay, let's do that for the other side. Get these bands out of the pin. Get these bands. Okay. Out. And again, we get this side of the band over this pin towards the bottom. So our band with the seed beads will be in the bottom side of this row of pins and not on the top. Okay? And make sure your seed beads are on these sections. Okay? With that, we are now ready to work on the remaining bands. And here is another pair of bands that is easy to miss. So make sure that you loop. Okay? And we will be looping all the way to this pin over here. Like so. Now, on the other side, go for this band. Make sure you don't miss it. Okay, now let's go for these horizontal bands up top. Go all the way to the bottom of the bands on this pin, and then get these bands out. Okay, it's a heavy layer, and loop to this pin. Okay, get them out, and then loop to this pin. Okay, what remains would be these two pairs of bands that we will loop forward. But before we do that, you have to remember to add your yellow band for the nose. And we will loop it twice on this pin. 1 and 2. Okay, then we will loop these two sets of bands. So this is how the layout will look like with the bands all looped. You might want to pause the video and compare your work with the one on the screen. Grab a single band and you will use it to secure these loops on this top pin. Okay, so go into this pin. Okay, and get your single band onto the hook. And then get it out. Okay. And when you secure these top loops, make sure that this band holding the hair pieces is in the loop. Okay. So it'll be secured together with the top loops. So tie a knot on this section over here. Don't over tighten. You could tighten this when the piece is off the loom. Okay, so with that, we are now ready to pull this entire piece off the loom. And we will be using the end of a crochet hook to pry the heavy layers off the loom so that we don't break the bands in the process. Whenever you feel a resistance from the bands, go into that pin and pry them out with the end of a crochet hook or whatever similar object you could use to do that. Stretch out your piece. You will hear the bands clicking into position. Okay, so here are the things that you want to do. You want to pull out the ears and you want to pull them upwards. Okay. Then you will want these hair pieces to be equally stretched. So I place them all on my pin and then spin them like so. Okay, and to get rid of this gap between the hair pieces, I determine which the middle band is, and in my case it's this band. So I get into this white band, okay, and then grab the loop, the middle black loop, and get it into that section over there. Okay, and then I pull on my black bands again and very carefully pull out my hook. You can actually pull on the bands individually to even out the stretching. Okay, we want them to be evenly looped like so. So work on that until you get them evenly looped. For the eyes, okay, they will usually be in this section over here. We want to get them to this section over here. So just, okay, pull them manually or with a pair of tweezers. Just nudge them or push them to that side like so. Okay, for the nose piece, we go to the back and pull out one side of the band like so, and that will give you the shape of the nose that you like. Okay, for the legs, okay, if you want your figure to be standing up, you could leave the legs as is, but I would like to have my figure in a sitting position. So I pull on these bands from the back. I pull them out, and that will bend my legs forward and make it look like my figure is in a sitting position. All of the figures in this series that I made are in a sitting position. Try to finish as much of the fine tuning as you can before you add the whiskers, because once the whiskers are in place, you cannot do any more pulling or stretching of the figure. Okay. Let's work on the whiskers. For the whiskers, we will be using 3 black bands for each side of the face. I already worked on one side, and now I'd like to show you how to do it on the other side. So stretch out the black bands. Okay, and then cut them. And we would like to go into this section over here. You will see these 2 bands near the eyes, and we would like to go in between those 2 bands, and we will go from the back. So using the Rainbow Loom hook, we go into this section over here so that we could go out that section where I wanted my whiskers to come out from. Okay, like so. Okay, in between those 2 bands. Okay, grab the black bands and get one end of those bands. Get one end into that spot and out the back. Like so. Okay, so you will have one end in the back and one end in the front. And make sure that you have enough length here in the back so that you could tuck your bands into this band. Okay, you can grab them one at a time or all 3 at the same time, whichever is easier for you. I just find doing it one at a time easier for me. Okay. Okay, make sure you have enough length. If you think it's too long, you could just pull them out a bit and then pull them out the front. Now, we go to the front and we sort through our bands, make sure they don't look twisted. Okay, one of them will go this way, one of them will go this way towards the top, and the middle will be horizontal. Okay, so how do we do that? For the one that goes up top, okay, we will get it through this section over here. So we will go into these bands up top, okay, and then pull that band in. So you will see that it's going towards the top. For this one that goes to this section, we will go into these 2 bands and this 1 band next to them. Okay, and then pull this band in like so. Okay, and then for this middle band, okay, we want it to go into this section, so we pull it into these bands. Okay, and then make sure that there is some slack in your bands. So pull out the band so there's some slack, not a lot of it. Just enough to make it look like the whiskers are sticking out of the face and not pinned down to the face, like so. Okay, when you're happy with the look on your whiskers, go to the back and you tuck in the ends of the bands into the same bands holding the other ends. Okay, I do it one at a time. Okay, then when I do that, I check for the slack again. Okay, so I adjust and then pull them in as needed. Okay, either pull them in or you pull them out as needed to get your desired look. And when you're happy with the look from the front, okay, you grab your pair of scissors and just cut the bands to equal length, like so. And then grab this band and tuck them under that band. For those of you who did the Hello Kitty whiskers on the other tutorial, this is a modification of that design. I tucked in my bands to these bands in the middle, and I found out that tucking them into these on the sides of the middle bands is better. So if you wanted to adjust to this design when you make the Hello Kitty figure, then you may do so. I will make an annotation on that YouTube video to link to this video. So that's our figure for Dear Daniel, and it's made on the single Rainbow Loom. All the main characters from Hello Kitty and Friends can now be made on the single Rainbow Loom. Check out our tutorials on the PG's Lumacy channel.